Here's a truth not many dare to admit. Not everyone is afraid of being alone. Some people, like those with avoidant attachment, actually feel safest in silence, in spaces where no one touches the deepest parts of them. But that doesn't mean they don't know how to love or don't crave connection. They've simply learned that closeness means pain, and being needed means being controlled, pulled into emotional chaos they never learned how to navigate. As someone who once lived inside that avoidant pattern, I understand the desire to love, but the fear of being consumed, the feeling of being cherished, yet pulling away the moment someone gets too close. If you or someone you love has shown signs of this pattern, this video is for you. Together, we'll uncover what's really happening inside the mind of an avoidant when love begins. Why do they disappear just when the connection deepens? And most importantly, is there a way they can learn to love without abandoning themselves? This is not just another psychology video. This is a journey into the heart of an invisible wound. If any part of this resonates with you, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay until the end, because maybe, just maybe, this is the first time you'll finally feel seen for who you really are. Here's a truth not many are ready to face. Avoidants are not cold or heartless. They are often the ones who had to learn, very early, how to need no one as a survival strategy. When a child expresses emotion and gets ignored, told they're too sensitive, or dismissed as a burden, their mind begins to internalize a silent lesson. Your feelings are not valid. And from there, they begin to build a wall, a quiet armor around the heart. Children don't shut down naturally. They shut down because connection was once slammed shut on them. Over time, the avoidant grows into adulthood with a harmful belief: I'm only safe if I don't need anyone. They become hyper-independent, self-reliant to the extreme, unwilling to show vulnerability or rely on others. But beneath that exterior lies a silent ache, a longing to be seen, loved, accepted, smothered by a fear of being hurt again. So when love finally arrives, something that should be healing, it becomes a threat. Intimacy reminds them of past overwhelm, of feeling controlled or consumed by others' expectations. They want connection, but fear losing themselves in it. They crave love, but protect themselves by pushing it away. They want to trust, but the fear of being broken again makes them sabotage the very bond they long for, not because they don't care, but because they're protecting the most fragile part of themselves. At first, the relationship feels easy. Distance still exists, but as things deepen, their nervous system panics. They don't feel suffocated because of you, but because their defense system is activated. And sadly, many aren't aware this is happening. They only know they feel tense, uncomfortable, confused, and without knowing how to name it, they fall back on what they know: withdrawal. But withdrawal doesn't mean lack of emotion. In truth, avoidants often feel deeply, but have suppressed those feelings for so long they don't know how to process them. That's why their silence, emotional distance, or even ghosting is not about indifference, it's about survival. They're afraid that if they stay too close for too long, they'll lose themselves. They fear that if you see their true, vulnerable self, you'll leave, just like before. If you've loved an avoidant, you may have felt dismissed, rejected, like the only one trying. But truth is, in their silence, they are struggling too. They don't want to hurt you, but they also don't know how to cross their own emotional wall. And if you are the avoidant, know this: you're not broken. You're protecting a wound that hasn't been healed. And you can learn to love again in a way that's safe, conscious, and whole. One of the most confusing parts of loving an avoidantly attached person is the sudden emotional reversal. In the beginning, They often sweep you into a whirlwind of intensity, full of warmth, attention, and emotional presence. You may feel deeply desired, prioritized, and uniquely seen. But then, almost as if someone flipped a switch, they begin to grow distant, colder, quieter, and withdrawn without explanation. Many call this the love and disappear pattern, but at its core, it's a nervous system reaction, a deep survival response that activates when they begin to feel too close, too emotionally exposed. For the avoidant, the honeymoon phase is the easiest because it doesn't yet demand deep vulnerability or emotional risk. It brings excitement and control. They are the giver, the leader, the one directing the pace. But as you begin to respond with sincerity and emotional depth, as the relationship starts to move toward real closeness and intimacy, something within them sounds the alarm. Danger. I'm being seen too clearly. And that feeling of being seen may feel like connection to you, but to them, it's a threat. Because if you see the soft, imperfect parts of them, you might leave, and they'd be hurt all over again. So, they withdraw. Not because they've stopped loving you, but because they don't know how to stay emotionally close and feel safe at the same time. They use distance as a way to regulate the situation, to regain control. And in that silence, you begin to doubt yourself. Try harder, give more, which, ironically, only increases the pressure they feel. A profound paradox within the avoidant attachment style is this. They deeply crave love, yet retreat when love requires emotional presence. When you're vulnerable, when you need a shoulder to lean on, a comforting word, or simply quiet companionship, what you receive instead is distance. Not because they don't care, but because they don't know how to stay close without feeling trapped or overwhelmed by emotional expectations. Many avoidantly attached individuals grew up in environments where emotions were burdens their own, and others. Perhaps they were ignored, told to toughen up, or only received affection when they were no trouble at all. This led to an unconscious belief. I'm only lovable if I don't need anyone, and if no one needs me. So, when you need them in a natural and healthy way, it triggers a form of emotional defensiveness. They feel like you're asking too much, that your emotional closeness threatens their autonomy and sense of self. What they don't realize is that staying through those vulnerable moments is the very thing that builds true connection. But because they've never had a model for that, their internal dialogue becomes, if I stay, I'll be swallowed whole. And so they withdraw again. And the heartbreaking truth is that each time this happens, you begin to retreat too, learning to self-soothe in silence, eventually no longer turning to them. The bond loosens, not because love fades, but because the capacity to stay present in another's emotions was never learned or practiced. Those with avoidant attachment rarely express what they truly want. They might say they need space or aren't ready for anything serious, yet they don't fully end things either. They let the relationship drift in ambiguity, not committing, but not releasing. They always keep a back door slightly open just in case things get too intense and they need to retreat without explanation. And if one day they feel empty, they can return as if they never left. They fear being tied down, yet they also fear being forgotten. This inner contradiction turns them into people who come and go, repeating a familiar cycle, disappearing when you need them most, then reappearing just as you're learning to live without them. What they don't realize is that not committing is, in itself, a decision, and their silence becomes a quiet form of rejection. In their minds, keeping distance is safety, but that very distance is what slowly kills trust. They don't understand that each time they avoid clarity, you're left to guess, and guessing, over time, wears you down. You start protecting yourself, learning to not rely on them. And when they come back, the heartbreaking part isn't that you're angry, it's that you've become silent just like they once were. That's when they realize the escape route they clung to is now a closed door from your side. Deep down, avoidants crave love just like anyone else. They want someone who truly sees them, someone who understands their silence and stays through their walls. But the closer they get to connection, the more fear rises. For them, love doesn't automatically mean healing. It often echoes memories of pain, control, and emotional suffocation. They've learned that letting someone in doesn't mean safety, it invites risk. So even when their heart opens, their mind slams the door shut. They want you close, but not too close. They want your love, but not all of it. Every time you inch closer, they step back. Not because they dislike you, but because they fear you might truly see them, all their flaws, fears, and the fragile parts they've never been taught how to offer safely. Inside, they carry a deep internal conflict. They need you to feel valued, yet fear losing themselves by letting you in too much. That's why relationships with avoidance often feel like a painful dance, a push and pull between closeness and withdrawal. One moment, you're let in, feeling the warmth of real intimacy. The next, you're shut out without warning. But the truth is, they're not trying to hurt you. They simply don't know how to love without fear. In the inner world of the avoidant, love is a quiet battlefield where the longing to connect constantly wrestles with the instinct to stay protected, alone, and in control. Avoidant individuals are not heartless. They can care deeply, even love deeply, but they struggle to sit with emotions, especially when those emotions don't belong to them. To them, emotions feel unpredictable, unmanageable, and therefore dangerous. Many grew up in environments where emotions weren't welcomed. They were ignored, dismissed, or worse, punished. So, their brains learned an effective survival strategy: shut the heart down and stay in control. In relationships, this shows up clearly. Avoidants tend to pull away, shut down, or grow cold when their partner starts to show vulnerability, when you're sad, angry, hurting, or simply need to be held. To them, those moments aren't invitations to connect. They are red flags that scream, "Get out while you can." They don't know how to stay present without feeling like they're being swallowed by someone else's emotional world. So when you cry, they go quiet. When you reach for a hug, they take a step back. When you say you feel alone, they become more distant. Not because they don't care, but because being present with your feelings makes them feel completely lost. They don't know what to do. They fear that staying will mean losing control, or worse, becoming responsible for your emotional world, something they've never been equipped to handle. That's why avoidants often intellectualize emotion. They solve problems with logic, with analysis, with distance, but those same strategies leave the other person feeling unseen, unloved, and alone. They may ask themselves, "Why is this such a big deal? Why are they overreacting?" But underneath it all is a quiet panic about not knowing how to respond, and the shame of not knowing how to love in a way that truly connects. The painful irony is this: the love is often there, but it's buried beneath a wall of defense. And the more they love someone, the more those defenses are triggered. They pull away, then beat themselves up for not being able to stay present. It's a cycle of fear and regret that only breaks when the avoidant begins to learn how to stay with emotion, both their own and someone else's. Healing doesn't come from avoiding emotion. It comes from learning how to be present with it, without being consumed. And that requires breaking through many old fears and beliefs like, "I'm not enough," "I'll be controlled," or "if I stay, I'll disappear." One of the most defining traits of avoidance is their inability to stay fully, yet an equal inability to completely walk away. They remain stuck between the desire for connection and the fear of losing themselves in it. And it's this in-between state that causes profound suffering both for them and for the people who love them. For avoidantly attached individuals, emotional closeness is both magnetic and terrifying. They crave connection, yet their fear of losing freedom, boundaries, control, or selfhood quickly takes over. As a result, they rarely exit a relationship decisively, but they also rarely step fully into it. They hover in emotional limbo, always standing at the door, maybe ready to enter, but always prepared to run. When a relationship begins to deepen, when the other person opens up and shows vulnerability, the avoidant starts to retreat. Not because they no longer care, but because it feels like they're being seen too clearly. Vulnerability becomes a threat. They fear that if you get too close, you'll strip away their armor. So they begin to distance, slower replies, less engagement, fewer intimate moments. The warmth starts to fade without explanation, and yet they don't leave. They still linger, watching, waiting, holding on to an invisible string. They may disappear, only to reappear with a casual, "Hey, how have you been?" as if nothing happened. This behavior confuses their partner, who thought it was over, only to be pulled back in. They assume the avoidant returns because of love, but often it's just to confirm, "Do I still matter to you?" Avoidants don't leave because they still need some form of connection, but they can't bear the weight of full intimacy. They're afraid of emotional emptiness, so they keep doors slightly open. But they return not to restart something healthy, but to soothe the fear of being forgotten. In their minds, that equals a loss of value, of meaning. That's why many avoidants maintain several ambiguous emotional ties, never fully present, but never fully gone. Yet ironically, this lack of clarity keeps them from ever feeling truly safe in love. Deep inside them lives a wounded child, one who was never comforted, never truly seen. The adult avoidant carries that unhealed child into every relationship. They don't believe their emotions deserve space, and they don't believe they can stay in love without being consumed by it. So when it gets deep, they pull away, and when you walk away, they return, but their actions are driven by fear, not by mature love. What they don't yet know is this: real love doesn't demand self-erasure. True intimacy is not fusion. It's where two whole selves stand strong but choose to reach into each other's worlds without violating it. To reach this, the avoidant must learn to sit with themselves, heal the abandoned inner child, and begin to believe that staying doesn't mean losing freedom. One of the most painful and confusing experiences when dealing with an avoidant is their emotional non-responsiveness. You open your heart, they go silent. You reach out in vulnerability, they disappear. You show your need, they withdraw. It feels like you're talking to a wall, cold, unfeeling, and unreachable. But this doesn't mean they don't feel. On the contrary, avoidants often feel too much. So much that they have to shut down in order not to drown in the intensity. Their lack of response isn't a sign of apathy, it's a survival strategy, deeply rooted in childhood. They learned long ago that emotions weren't safe, weren't welcomed, and were often dismissed or punished. So now, their nervous system turns off as soon as emotions rise, theirs or someone else's. When you say you're hurt, they freeze. Not because they don't care, but because they never learned how to be present for another person's pain. They weren't raised in an environment where emotions were validated. So now, in adulthood, your raw honesty overwhelms them. They don't know how to stay without feeling trapped or threatened. This is why their common default is to retreat quietly, without explanation. The silence wounds the other person, who just wanted a real response, a bit of presence, a human connection. Worse, they often rationalize their withdrawal by blaming the other. "You're too sensitive. I just didn't want to make things worse. I needed time to think." But deep down, They don't need time. They need to learn how to stay with their feelings without fleeing. Their emotional withdrawal also becomes a form of control. By staying silent, they maintain power, forcing the other person to chase, to guess, to fill in the emotional gaps. Yet ironically, they themselves feel lost in that same silence. They just won't admit it. Shutting down doesn't make them strong, it makes them emotionally isolated. In relationships, they're never fully present. Part of them always remains locked away, afraid that opening up will mean reliving old wounds. Healing doesn't come from being understood by others. It begins when avoidants start understanding themselves. They must learn that emotions are not burdens. That crying, needing support, feeling hurt are not signs of weakness, but signs of humanity. And when an avoidant begins to respond, even in small ways, a text saying, "I don't know what to say, but I'm here," an eye contact held just a moment longer, an awkward but honest hug, it marks a massive leap in their healing journey. Non-responsiveness is not their identity, it is a reflection of unhealed fear. And the good news is, fear can be met. It can be felt, understood, and released if they choose to stay instead of running. If you've ever loved an avoidant, you're likely familiar with how they can disappear for weeks, even months, and then return as if nothing ever happened. They message you with a light tone, maybe suggest grabbing coffee, perhaps even ask how you've been, as if the rupture, the silence, the heartbreak never existed. To others, this might look manipulative or emotionally cold, but in truth, it is a clear manifestation of emotional detachment, a deep-rooted defense mechanism, not necessarily cruelty. Avoidants never learned how to sit with discomfort. Instead of facing and processing difficult emotions, they learned to skip over them. To pretend nothing happened is easier than saying, "I'm scared," or "I hurt you, and I don't know what to do." The mask of "I'm fine" is not strength, it's a sign of unhealed emotional fragility. They were never taught that emotions need to be acknowledged, verbalized, and held in a safe space. They assume that if they wait long enough, everything will settle down. But the truth is, emotions don't disappear, they go underground, only to resurface as avoidance, withdrawal, or self-sabotaging behavior. This habit of pretending everything is okay keeps them disconnected not just from others, but from themselves. They avoid guilt, avoid vulnerability, avoid confronting the loneliness of being misunderstood, and deep down, there's a voice inside that says, "I'm tired of living this way." But because they don't acknowledge it, they don't change. They repeat. New relationship, initial connection, overwhelm, withdrawal, emotional amnesia. Avoidants don't need someone to heal them. What they truly need is to make a conscious decision to pause, not to escape, but to see clearly, to reconnect with their emotional body, to learn to apologize, to take responsibility, and most importantly, to love without fleeing from love. If you're someone trying to understand an avoidant, remember this: just because they pretend nothing's wrong doesn't mean they don't care. It may be the only survival strategy they've ever known, but it doesn't mean you have to carry the emotional burden forever. You can understand and still walk away. You can have compassion without abandoning your boundaries. Avoidance will only begin to change when the pain of avoiding becomes greater than the fear of staying. Not every avoidant stays stuck forever. There comes a moment, often after multiple breakups, prolonged isolation, and the absence of someone who once deeply cared, when the avoidant hits a threshold. It's no longer "I'm fine" or "I don't need anyone," but something much more honest: "I'm tired." And that, right there, is the first time they begin to feel. Not your emotions, not your pain, but their own. The silence, the casual flings, the people who once tried but eventually gave up, they begin to echo inside the avoidant, like fractures they can no longer ignore. And for the first time, Instead of avoiding, they sit with the discomfort. They begin to feel an unnamed sadness, a creeping loneliness, a hollow space inside that no one, not even themselves, has dared to enter. This is when the avoidant begins to ask, why do I always run from those who love me? Why does closeness trigger panic in me? Why can't I hold on to good things when they come? This isn't full enlightenment, but it's the beginning of self-awareness. And that matters deeply, because no healing can happen as long as pain is denied. When they stop blaming the world, their exes, or their past, and begin to look inward, that's when the wall begins to crack. But the heartbreaking truth? Not everyone stays long enough to see this moment. Sometimes, the person who once loved them most can no longer wait. And that too becomes a breaking point, a real loss. And through that loss, the avoidant starts to understand, love isn't control. Love isn't losing freedom. It's where you're allowed to be fully yourself without defense. They begin to learn how to sit with emotions without shutting down. They start to say things like, I'm not okay, but I'm trying to understand that. I need space, but I don't want to lose you. I was afraid of love because I didn't know how to do it. And if you, the one who walked through their storm, can listen without falling back into the old cycle, this could be the start of something new, something deeper. But if your heart has already moved on, you have every right to go. Healing does not require you to stay. It only asks for truth from both sides. When an avoidant truly chooses to heal, it doesn't start with a grand declaration. It's not a dramatic apology message to an ex. It's not a caption claiming, I've changed. It begins with something quieter, something internal, a decision made in solitude. I don't want to live disconnected from myself anymore. Healing, for the avoidant, is not about fixing themselves for someone else. It's about realizing that their silence, distance, and withdrawals no longer protect them, they isolate them. They start to understand that the relief they feel after pulling away isn't freedom, it's a defense mechanism rooted in fear. For the first time, they begin to stay. Not just stay in relationships, but stay with their own emotions. They start to breathe through their triggers. They try to listen instead of defend. They begin to face the original wounds, the childhood belief that needing others is weak, that vulnerability is unsafe. And instead of suppressing those parts, they learn to hold them gently. This is not a smooth journey. They'll still want to shut down at times. They'll still feel overwhelmed when emotional connection feels too demanding. But this time, they don't run. They pause and say, I don't know how to hold this emotion, but I'm trying. I want to stay. I just don't fully know how yet. That is the language of an avoidant becoming conscious, no longer shutting doors, but also not pretending to be someone they're not. They choose awareness over reaction, truth over perfection, connection over control. When the avoidant chooses healing, they don't become perfect overnight, but they become real. They stop being ruled by their past and begin to root their actions in presence. And if you are standing beside someone like this, see their quiet effort, not just their words. Because for someone who once feared closeness, just choosing to stay that is already a deeply loving act. Building a connection with someone who has an avoidant attachment style is not about healing them. It's about learning how to walk beside them without losing yourself. This is a path that requires love, boundaries, and mindful presence. First, understand, they are not avoiding you, they are avoiding the wounds inside them. It's not love that scares them, it's the fear of losing control or being consumed in love. So, if you're in love, or have been, with an avoidant person, stop trying to break down their walls by charging in. Instead, become a safe space outside those walls, where they can step out slowly, voluntarily, rather than feel dragged. You don't have to unlock their heart. They must do it themselves. But what you can do is not add pressure. What makes an avoidant retreat faster than anything else is feeling like they must be someone you expect to be worthy of your love. Offer space, but space with connection, not silent detachment. For example, I'm here if, when you want to share. It's okay if you're not clear right now. When you are, I'd love to hear. These calm, non-demanding invitations tell them, I'm not trying to control you. I'm not judging you. You don't have to be perfect to be loved. That is the foundation of secure attachment. But just as importantly, you must have boundaries, not to punish them, but to protect yourself from losing who you are while trying to hold on to the connection. You can't love for them. You can't do intimacy on their behalf. You can only show up honestly and let them decide whether they want to meet you there. And here's what's beautiful. If they're truly choosing to heal, they will come to appreciate the quiet clarity of your boundaries. Because someone who has lived in emotional avoidance doesn't need another person to rescue them from themselves. They need a conscious companion, someone who stays present, so that when they finally step out of the cold, they find that they're not alone anymore. When an avoidant returns after you've walked away, one of the hardest questions you'll face is, are they coming back with their heart or with a threatened ego? You see, avoidants often don't return because of love, but because of the anxiety triggered when they lose the silent power that once allowed them to control the emotional dynamic. When you're no longer initiating, texting, or reacting, they begin to feel disoriented. And if you once represented a deep emotional bond, your withdrawal becomes a disruption to their inner stability. But don't be too quick to mistake a moment of emotional panic for true transformation. An avoidant who is genuinely healing won't reach out with vague messages like, "Hey, how are you?" or "I miss you." They'll show up with clarity, accountability, and humility. They won't just test if you still respond. They will say, "I've taken a long, hard look at myself. I want to apologize, and if you're open, I'd like to hear you again." They won't play emotional guessing games. They'll step into real dialogue, even without the certainty of being forgiven. The biggest difference is this. Someone emotionally maturing won't try to dominate your space, but will respect it. They now understand that connection is built on mutual consent, not psychological tug-of-war. They won't panic if you need time to reflect instead. They'll give you that space without pressure or manipulation. You'll notice the difference in how they sustain the connection, consistent, honest, without disappearing when feelings get intense, and without pulling away when you need emotional steadiness. They'll begin asking how you feel, not just talking about themselves. They're not trying to soften your heart. They're simply showing up without demanding anything in return. And the clearest sign? They're not coming back because they're lonely. They're coming back because they finally understand the value of genuine connection. You'll feel it not just through their words, but in the energy they bring. Calmer, more grounded, no longer laced with control, but filled with presence and sincerity. And here's what you must remember. You are not obligated to welcome anyone back, no matter how much they seem to have changed. No healing is ever enough if your heart no longer feels safe in the connection. Forgiveness does not mean reunion. Healing does not require reattachment. It means having the courage to choose a path that no longer reopens the old wound. It's time we see avoidant individuals with clearer, more compassionate eyes. They're not heartless or cold. They are simply souls who never learned how to feel safe in emotional closeness. In their past, expressing emotions brought discomfort, rejection, or even punishment, so they adapted. Love began to feel threatening, not healing. Healing, then, is not a battle of fixing or winning over someone. It's a return to the self, where the avoidant learns to stay present with their own feelings instead of withdrawing, where silence is no longer a wall, but a doorway into self-awareness. where intimacy is no longer a cage, but a shared space where freedom and connection can coexist. Here's the core truth. Anyone can relearn how to attach securely, but no one can do it for you. Healing doesn't begin with loving someone else. It begins with learning not to abandon yourself every time emotions rise, every time discomfort knocks, every time fear whispers run. And if you love someone who is avoidant, please remember, you cannot heal them with love, but you can hold a space that is free of blame, pressure, and emotional harm. A space where, if they are ready, their healing journey may begin. A small action that holds great power. If you are avoidant, stay with your emotions 30 seconds longer each day. Just that. That's how it begins.